Have you ever been fascinated with the early 1900 mob bosses? They had one goal in mind, and it was to make money, and they were ruthless doing it. Here are the top 5 most dangerous mob bosses in the US. Number 1, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel. Bugsy Siegel was born in 1906 and died in 1947. Being known for his unpredictability and hot temper, he was quickly given the name Bugsy. He was deeply involved in the Italian-American mob. He was the leader of Murder Inc., which was essentially an organization that got all the mob bosses together, and they would hand out hits on people that they didn't like. Bugsy Siegel was known to recruit members to his mob that were from the poor or working class neighborhoods. Once those members of the mob started making money, they were very devoted to Bugsy. Most of the mob members worked in the areas of extortion and bootlegging since they were in the middle of Prohibition. Bugsy left New York and traveled to California in 1936. His time as a mobster during this period was mostly as a hitman. He was specifically known for his hot temper and his eagerness for violence. In 1941, Siegel was tried for murder of a friend and fellow mobster Harry Greenberg, who had turned informant. He was acquitted in 1942. A lot of people think he paid everyone off. He then traveled to Las Vegas to pioneer the new casino boom. He was instrumental in opening up the Flamingo Hotel, but it was said that he skimmed over $1 million off the construction price. This did not sit well with the other mob bosses now in Las Vegas. On June 20th, 1947, Siegel was shot dead by a sniper through the window of Hills Linden Drive mansion in Beverly Hills, California. Number 2, Vito Genovese. Born in 1897 and died in 1969, he was an Italian-born American mobster. He rose to power during Prohibition as an enforcer in the American mafia. He was a childhood friend of the Lucky Luciano family. He took part in the Castellammare's War, which was a war that involved several different mafias throughout Chicago. Vito Genovese was instrumental in the rise of the American mafia in the United States. He would later lead Lucky Luciano's crime family. After he became the leader, it was named the Genovese crime family out of respect to him. He was known for his brutality as well. Anyone that betrayed him or he thought they would betray him, he would have killed no matter what. In 1937, he fled to Italy, and for a brief period during World War II, he supported Mussolini's regime. He did not want to go back to the US at this time because he actually had a murder charge hanging over his head. In 1957, Genovese wanted the boss of all bosses title. This led to the murder of several other high-end mob bosses so he could gain that title. He murdered Albert Anastasia and attempted to murder Frank Costello. Immediately after that, he called a mafia summit to consolidate all of his power. During that meeting of all the mob bosses, it was raided by the police. He was convicted of narcotics and conspiracy charges and was sent to prison for 15 years. He was personally suspected of 5 or more murders, and it was thought that he had put hits out on over 10 people. He died in prison in 1969. Number 3, Tony Accardo. Born in 1906 and died in 1992. Tony Accardo started as a small-time mob member. The mob outfit he was with when he was younger served as Al Capone's talent pool. After doing well, he was recruited to the big leagues under Al Capone's notorious hitman, Jack Machine Gun McGurn. This is where he received his nickname as Joe Batters from none other than Al Capone himself. His nickname came after he killed 3 mobsters for betraying the outfit he was in. However, he killed all 3 mobsters with a baseball bat. On October 11th, 1926, Accardo may have participated in the assassination of North Side gang leader Jaime Weiss. After Al Capone was nabbed for tax evasion, he was given free rein to start his own chapter in the mob. In a short period of time, Accardo developed a very profitable chapter which included gambling, loan sharking, bookmaking, extortion, and the distribution of untaxed alcohol and cigarettes. After several high-end members either died or were arrested in the Al Capone mob, he was next in line to become the boss. He ran the mob very successfully for the next 30 years. It was said that Tony Accardo was one of the best mob leaders of all time because he had a knack for staying out of the spotlight. He would do his business under the radar and was super lucrative. A fun fact about Tony Accardo: in 1978, while Accardo was vacationing in California, burglars entered his River Forest home. Shortly afterwards, the 3 suspected thieves and 4 related persons were found strangled with their throats cut. Tony Accardo died peacefully in 1992. Number 4, Charles Lucky Luciano. Born in 1987 and died in 1962. He was an Italian-born American mob boss. Lucky Luciano started his criminal career in the 5 Points Gang. This was a very well-known gang in the area. He was also instrumental in creating the National Crime Syndicate, which would bring all of the mob bosses together, and eventually they would send hits out on people they didn't like. The crime syndicate would also bring all of the mob members together so that they could talk about their business and help each other out so that all of them were more lucrative. Luciano is considered the father of all organized crime in the United States. He was also the first official mob boss of the Genovese family. In 1920, Luciano had met many future mafia leaders, including Vito Genovese, Frank Costello, his longtime friend and future business partner through the 5 Points Gang. That same year, Lower Manhattan Mafia boss Joe Masseria hired Luciano as a gunman. It's unknown how many people he killed during that time, but you can assume it was quite a few. By 1925, Luciano was grossing over $12 million a year and made a personal income of about $4 million a year from running illegal gambling and bootlegging operations in New York. It also extended into Philadelphia. Luciano is well known for killing his way to the top. After ordering hits of several other mob bosses in the area, he became the most dominant mob boss at that time. He had reached the pinnacle of the underworld in the United States. His crime family controlled basically all the gambling, all of the alcohol, all of the cigarettes, pretty much everything across New York. He also became intertwined in the unions in New York. He controlled the Manhattan waterfront, garbage hauling, construction, garment business district, and the trucking companies. Eventually, Luciano was charged with 60 counts of compulsory prostitution. He was convicted and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. He was deported back to Italy, where he continued to lead the mob there and eventually died in 1962. Number 5, Al Capone. Born in 1899 and died in 1947. Al Capone was one of the most notorious mob bosses of all time. He was also one of the most dangerous. He obtained his notoriety and was almost a celebrity figure during the Prohibition era. He's also known by his infamous nickname, Scarface. As a teenager, he was also part of the 5 Points Gang. He became a bouncer at one of the brothels and dance houses. At that time, he had an altercation with a female coming into one of the businesses. That altercation led to the female's husband slashing him in the face with a knife. This left a big scar on his face, and this is where he got his nickname Scarface. Capone moved from New York to Chicago under the request of Johnny Torrio, a mob boss there. Capone became Torrio's bodyguard, which, as you might suspect, would lead to a lot of fights and most likely quite a few murders. Torrio went into retirement after a North Side gang member almost killed him. He was pretty afraid for his life, so he handed over the reins to Capone. Al Capone extended Torrio's bootlegging business through means of brutality. He actually gained the trust of the mayor of the city as well as all the police officers there. With that trust came safety because he had the law enforcement and the mayor in his pocket. Al Capone basically owned all of the businesses in Chicago. They would have to pay him a tax for keeping them safe. However, on the flip side of that, if they didn't want his protection, he would burn their business down. So they really didn't have a choice in the matter and basically just had to pay him a tax on everything they sold. This was the way Al Capone got so rich in such a short period of time. If an establishment didn't purchase liquor from Al Capone, he would burn their establishment down, and if the owners of the establishment were lucky enough, he would let them live. As many as 100 people were killed during that time because their buildings either burned down or were bombed. This had direct ties to Al Capone. He indulged in wearing expensive suits, smoking expensive cigars, and having expensive jewelry. This gave the persona that he was pretty much a celebrity in Chicago. Everywhere he went, people knew who he was. And he leaned into that title as well because at this point, he was pretty much untouchable. However, the North Side Gang of Chicago was after him. At one point, Al Capone's driver was found tortured to death. On September 20th, 1926, the North Side Gang actually set up a trap for Al Capone. This trap was set outside his headquarters. Machine gunners parked on each side of his headquarters shot through the windows in an attempt to kill him. However, Al Capone escaped unharmed and actually called for a truce with the North Side Gang. However, that truce fell through pretty quick. Some of Al Capone's close friends and acquaintances were actually captured and killed in the following 3 or 4 weeks after the attempt on his life. After all of that happened, Al Capone became increasingly security-minded. He wouldn't go anywhere without an entourage of people with guns. There were also several instances of people not being happy with Al Capone inside of his own gang. These people turned on him, and Al Capone essentially had them killed. Capone was widely assumed to have been responsible for ordering the 1929 St. Valentine's Day Massacre. The massacre was an attempt to eliminate Bugs Morgan, head of the North Side Gang. The motivation for the plan may have been the fact that the expensive whiskey illegally imported from Canada via the Detroit River had been hijacked while it was being transported to Cook County, Illinois. The massacre consisted of murdering 7 of the North Side Gang members in a house. They were basically gunned down and beaten to death. In the wake of the St. Valentine's Day murder, the police got involved and had to put an end to Capone. He was out of control. Walter Strong, a publisher for the Daily News, decided to ask his friend, Herbert Hoover, the president at the time, for help. He told Herbert Hoover that Chicago was lawlessness. They didn't have anything available to stop Capone and his gang. This led Herbert Hoover to send federal agents to Chicago and stop Al Capone. Al Capone was eventually arrested for tax evasion. Capone was sent to Alcatraz prison. He was released in 1939 as pretty much a goodwill gesture because his mental capacity just wasn't there anymore. However, he lived for 8 more years and died in 1947. Thank you for watching the top 5 most dangerous mobsters. If you like this content, please subscribe to my page for more.